Imagine you were born to a family where you had to survive from hand to mouth, a family with extreme financial struggles and limited resources. So you were left with no proper education or financial backing, only a bag of dreams. That was the sad reality of the founder of the famous Bacardi rum. Yet against all odds, the story of how he managed to build a billion-dollar company is one for the history books. However, this is not your typical rise to fame story. Behind this tale is one of the most unforeseen and cataclysmic events, giving rise to what we all know as the most iconic cocktail brands of all time. This is a story of resilience, innovation, and transformation. This is the story of Facundo Bacardi. Back in the early 19th century, Cuba was under Spanish rule and heavily reliant on slavery, with large numbers of enslaved Africans brought to the island to work on sugar plantations. This led to a steady stream of immigrants from Spain, as the sugar industry flourished, making Cuba one of the wealthiest colonies in the Spanish Empire. One of these immigrants was Facundo Bacardi, who at the age of 16 in 1830 left his hometown of Sitges, a port city in northeastern Spain, to seek his fortune in Cuba due to Spain's poor economic conditions. The young man was born into an average family that had to sell groceries to survive. Upon arriving in Santiago de Cuba, the island's second largest city, Facundo found work at a local distillery owned by a man named John Nunez. At the time, rum was quite different from what we know today, and was called aguardiente, or firewater in English. This was made by mixing water with molasses, a sugarcane byproduct. Aguardiente is so strong that many Cubans used it as medicine, boiling it in towns to ease pain and treat wounds, rather than drinking it as a beverage. Meanwhile, Facundo spent years working at John's distillery, producing aguardiente. But he had bigger ambitions. At one time, he dreamed of creating a more refined and sophisticated rum. But as time went by, his dream was about to die until something happened. The year was 1852, when the people of Cuba witnessed one of the biggest tragedies in history. It was a day like any other until the earth started vibrating, tearing through the Caribbean island. The earthquake that struck Santiago de Cuba caused a massive destruction in the city and its surroundings. Estimated to have a magnitude of 6.5 to 6.7, the historic Cathedral of Santiago de Cuba, a prominent landmark in the city, was heavily damaged, and numerous homes, churches, and public buildings were reduced to rubble. Streets were blocked by debris, hindering rescue and relief efforts. The exact number of casualties is uncertain, but it is estimated that thousands of people lost their lives, and many more were injured or left homeless. The earthquake also triggered landslides and tsunamis along the nearby coast, causing further loss of life and property damage, including John's distillery. Amidst the chaos, amidst the shattered fragments of buildings and dreams, one man saw a big opportunity. While the unfortunate might have been tragic, Facundo Bacardi decided to take advantage and launch his dream into reality. While thinking of his next move, he stumbled upon the worn-out distillery, battered but not broken by the earthquake. So he seized the opportunity, seeing it as a chance to carve his own path. But there was a problem. Facundo had no money or asset to acquire the facility. Meanwhile, he had met the love of his life, Amelia Moreau, the daughter of a wealthy plantation owner. This time, he had no choice but to run to his wife for help. Using his wife's money, Facundo was able to purchase John Nunez's distillery in 1862 for $3,500. A few weeks later, he started laying the foundation for the Bacardi distillery. The distillery came with a colony of fruit bats, which are considered symbols of good luck in Cuba, and would later become synonymous with the Bacardi brand. Firing up his unyielding spirit, Facundo set to work in this newly purchased distillery. Day and night, he worked tirelessly, mastering the ancient art of rum making, infusing each batch with a uniqueness that defined him. Although Facundo didn't have a background in alcohol production, he spent months experimenting until it all felt right. The result was a remarkably high-quality rum. And as opposed to previous brands, customers would visit Facundo's distillery to fill up their jugs and barrels. And so, from the ashes of devastation, Bacardi was set out to become the most famous brand in the Caribbean island. As demands increased, he decided to bottle his rum, which he marked with an iconic fruit bat symbol. However, this was only the beginning of his remarkable journey to success. At this point, the Bacardi rum was making massive sales and gaining popularity while being distributed all across Cuba. However, it is safe to say Facundo was a man with limited ambition. He never felt the need to globally expand his empire. All he wanted to do was sell the best quality rum in Cuba. So he began to explore the art of rum distillation, after noticing a growing demand in the spirits market for a top-tier Cuban rum. At the time, rum was seen as an inferior drink compared to red wine and whiskey, so he needed to prove everyone wrong. With the help of José León Bautier, a French-Cuban, Facundo experimented with different distillation techniques, including a special yeast strain, charcoal filtration, and aging in white oak barrels. These innovative methods resulted in a smoother, more refined rum that stood out in the market. They successfully sold this new product through Facundo's brother's general store, and with financial support from Facundo's younger brother Jose, they established the Bacardi Boutique and Company on February 4, 1862, and purchased a distillery outside of Santiago. At this moment, Facundo began to understand the importance of effective branding in promoting their product. After managing a general retail company in Cuba for many years, Facundo Bacardi's innovative rum greatly benefited from this experience. Now, he decided it was time to take the game to the next level. So they started marking each shipment of rum with a bold Bacardi M for Bacardi Maso. In 1874, the company changed its name to Bacardi and Company. Meanwhile, Facundo's younger brother decided to sell his shares, and his health declined. His sons invested in the business, eventually acquiring the majority stake. On the other hand, Bacardi rum was gaining worldwide recognition both in Cuba and other European countries, winning top honors in international awards. However, time was no longer on Facundo's side as he began to age. So in 1877, Facundo retired, transferring control of his business to his son, Emilio. In his early years at the company, Emilio transformed Bacardi into one of Cuba's largest corporations, with plantations and distilleries scattered across the island. He even opened a bottling facility in Barcelona, near his father's birthplace, marking Bacardi's first steps into the international market. Meanwhile, the United States became an obvious target for Bacardi's expansion. But with the ratification of the Prohibition Amendment in 1919, the company faced a major obstacle, and political unrest swept through Cuba as the country fought against Spanish imperialism. Prohibition wasn't entirely negative for Bacardi. Although they couldn't export drinks to the United States, American drinkers flocked to Cuba to purchase them legally. Following the repeal of the 18th Amendment, Bacardi capitalized on this demand, selling over 82,000 cases of liquor in the United States. While Facundo generally supported the Spanish, his son Emilio, who managed the company, was heavily involved in the struggle for Cuban independence. This drew suspicion from the authorities, leading to Facundo and Emilio's arrest during a government crackdown. During Emilio's 4-year imprisonment, the remaining brothers managed the business, with Facundo offering strategic guidance on how to run it successfully. But to avoid high import duties, they had no choice but to make a decision, one that later made Bacardi a rum hub. Since 1912, following the United States' control of Cuba, Bacardi saw expansion, setting up bottling plants in Barcelona and New York City. Prohibition hit the U.S. in the 1920s. Cuba became a safe place for American tourists, who consumed Bacardi's rum without restrictions. Passed down through 3 generations, Bacardi remained a family venture, relocating its headquarters to Havana in 1930. The famous rum became popular all over Cuba, but they were restricted. At a point, Ernest Hemingway, a big fan of their rum, traveled to Cuba and decided to settle down in Havana. He frequently visited the Floridita bar while drinking daiquiris made with Bacardi. This man's love for this cocktail inspired his novel Islands in the Stream. Bacardi is also mentioned in To Have and Have Not and For Whom the Bell Tolls. Now, during the 1960s Cuban Revolution led by Fidel Castro, Bacardi protected its secret recipe, trademark, and assets by relocating them to the Bahamas. Then they had an idea. Since Cuba is far from the United States, why not move operations to Puerto Rico and Mexico so as to facilitate trade with the United States? Eventually, they got rid of every operation in Cuba and transferred the brand to Puerto Rico and Mexico. Bacardi once owned the Havana Club and is currently in a legal dispute with the Cuban government over trademarks and ownership. Years later, Bacardi established its U.S. headquarters in Miami, Florida, located in a building designed by Cuban architect Enrique Gutierrez. Till date, the building remains an iconic landmark, known as the Bacardi Building. In 2006, Bacardi relocated its headquarters to Coral Gables, near Miami. Today, Bacardi is a globally renowned rum, offering various varieties from classic white to rich gold. After merging with Martini and Rossi in 1993, it has expanded its portfolio to include Bombay Sapphire, Grey Goose, and Dewar's, among others. But this is just the beginning.